If only they knew. The hub for young business minds.
Yes, people, it's Ted Lawlor, and welcome back to another episode of the If Only They Knew podcast. Today, we're joined by Molly Masters, who's the founder of Books That Matter, and she speaks about making £10,000 in just 10 minutes, a period on a Dragon's Den, and so much more. So if you want to understand how someone can build an amazing business despite the odds being against them, then this is the podcast for you.
Yeah, so I'm Molly and I'm the founder and CEO of Books That Matter, and we are a book subscription box by women for women, introducing female-led writers to the world.
Let's get straight into it. And why books? Because I think I heard you on another podcast recently. You said when your mum told your friends that she was calling you Molly Masters, they was like, oh, it sounds like she could be a writer or something like that. Is that right? So
that's so cute that you've listened to that. That's a very specific podcast reference. So thank you. It. Yeah, my mum's going to be all over that, by the way. My mum did say that. I think it was the alliteration. And I think possibly since that point, she was like, thinking of how she could get me into that career. I'm joking, but she actually was like the inspiration for all of it. I grew up in quite a working class family, and my mum was a stay-at-home mum and a childminder for all of the early years for me and my sister, and she inspired me so much to reading. She taught me how to read, and by the time I was at school, I was far beyond my reading age. And so I think because of her, like books and creativity have always been a really big part of my life, and even though it wasn't in a sense that I grew up in a house which had massive wall-to-wall libraries, I know very few people who do, but like weekly trips to the library and stuff with my mum were the things that I remember most about my childhood. And I think that just really started off my love of books, and it was kind of coincidence now that I look back on it that I had a childhood and a young adulthood full of really amazing female English teachers who are really, really passionate about the subjects that they teach. And that kind of led me on to being passionate about books and literature myself. So I think that's where it all started from, just having those really strong female influences, and just strong influences full stop, people who are going to encourage you to pursue your passions, even though there's quite a lot of pressure, especially now, around literature and arts being a less viable option for young people to go to university with, which is complete crap. Don't know whether I can swear on the podcast, but I feel very passionately about that. There's so much going on in the world and so many opportunities that arts and literature are definitely not a cop-out or easy or not useful. And so I think, I was really lucky to have a lot of people in my life who were encouraging me to pursue reading, and it got me here. So I just love books, basically. Just a big old nerd.
Well, it's quite interesting that you said that, isn't it? Because I was sort of expecting you to say that, like, because that was going to be my question. Like, it's weird how you can sort of craft your actual self and your skills and what you're interested in from a very early age. Like you said, you was always there was always a book in front of you, and that was sort of, you was led down that path. Because I was going to ask, like, what sort of led you to get into it? But I guess that's that early stage, you sort of found the passion from books, from doing that and sort of being involved in it. But in a more later stage, in a more recent time, how did you sort of get experience to get really hands-on in the book world, if that makes sense? Because am I right in saying you worked in bookshops and stuff like that, and you was always sort of floating around books? Is that right? And is that how you got your confidence and experience?
Yeah, I was definitely very introverted as a child, and although I had a lot of friends, I didn't always find that part of school that easy. And it wasn't that I was ditching like social situations for books, but I think I always really enjoyed having a book at hand. And when I got into like free reading, I don't know if that's the same for people now, but I was just away. And I know, like many other girls and young boys at that time, I was kind of going through all the Jacqueline Wilson books and just anything that was a series. I just really got my teeth into it. And I think that led me to kind of move on to creative writing, wanting to be like a bit of a Jacqueline Wilson myself. And that led on to kind of, I guess, it becomes more formalized into being, you know, somebody who's relatively passionate and good at essay writing and it led me to go on to English literature and stuff. But whilst I was doing that, I got a job in WH Smith, which is pretty much like the only like shop in like the small town that I grew up in that wasn't like a greengrocer's or something. But because it was just amazing. I loved working with all the new books that were there. Like I said, I am a nerd and I own that now. I used to be so worried about it, but now I'm just like, no, I loved it when the new books came in, putting them on the shelf, that new book smell. And when it was quiet, I got to read all the new releases. So I was literally being paid to read. And it was, as long as I didn't mind standing on my feet and wearing one of those not so flattering fleeces at WH Smith, it was like a dream job to me. And so, yeah, during that time, I think there were just many moments in my childhood and in those like formative adult years where I just turned to books either as an escape or as kind of a way to fuel my own creative writing. And I think when you spend more time reading, you become a better writer and more kind of eloquent, you become more confident. And I think, you know, that's something that is not the lost art that people think it would be in the age of like e-readers, iPads. People love books and are always going to love books. And I'm just really lucky that I had so many different ways to enjoy them. So I think that was, yeah, the path to books in my kind of adult years. And yeah, I just loved WH Smith. It was great.
You mentioned there as well, what's the correct term? I don't want to offend anyone. Did you say you come from like a small town, village? What's the correct term?
Yeah. So I think it is a aspirational village that kind of masquerades as a town. There are not many people, and I don't really know the definition of a town or a village, but it's quite a big town, like quite a big village basically. So it's very small, everyone knows everyone. So being on Dragon's Den last week, like it seems to have been like going around the village quite a lot, so everybody knows. But that was really nice, but it also doesn't really prepare you that much for the rest of the world and what is out there.
We will get on to Dragon's Den in just a moment, but that is what I wanted to say on that sort of point. Like I heard you've come from quite a humble background. I think that's the right way to say it, similar to myself, sort of. I guess quite a struggle at times. You sort of weren't given any money to get started by like a rich mum or dad or anything like that, similar to me. So I think we've come from similar backgrounds in terms of that sense, but obviously different parts of the world. But yeah, I've heard that you hustled your way into networking events and you sort of did anything you could to get by. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I really admire anybody like yourself who's built themselves a platform from nothing, from not knowing anybody, having those connections. And I think people are getting better now at recognizing and owning how much accountability they have for the connections in worlds like this, like media, podcasting, publishing. If you don't have a leg up, it is really bloody difficult to make your way and get yourself known. And that's something that's never lost on me when I'm looking around who's got a seat at the table when I'm putting things together for Books That Matter, because I want to make sure that there's opportunities out there that I didn't have. And I had the most supportive family ever, but that doesn't always mean that you've got the most money in your pocket and people who can introduce you to the right people. So yeah, I went to university in Sussex and I was the first in my family to go to university. So that in itself was like quite a lot of pressure. To choose the right one, do the right course, do as well as I possibly could. And when I started Books That Matter, it became even more apparent to me how hierarchical the publishing industry is, how it is who you know and not necessarily what you know. It's what school you went to, what internships you're able to have. And there's such a big disparity between people who are working at university and people who are able to do unpaid internships and not have to worry about paying their rent. And that's when we all get those emails about not having enough experience for a job. It's often, you know, predominantly working class or people of minority that don't have the luxury of being able to do an unpaid internship. And it doesn't sound like a luxury, but I remember working 3 jobs and then being able to pay my rent to do uni. Wow. And it wasn't easy starting up Books That Matter, and I feel at a place now where it is getting easier. The business never gets easier, but the accessibility and the financial aspect is a lot easier. But when I started, I went to London Book Fair and basically had to sit down with all of these people at publishers and convince them that what I was doing was worth their time. And a lot of the time it was a lot of no's, and that is that is so hard to receive in person. Email no's are fine, but like face to face, somebody telling you that they don't really think it's worth their time or that it won't be very big is really hard. And I remember Fourth Estate publishers, who are an imprint of HarperCollins, were the first people to give me a proper chance, and they gave me an introductory price for their books, that I could have them in the boxes so I could make it financially viable. And it was great. And obviously I started Books That Matter from a startup grant, like a competition that I entered, and that was incredible. But that whole process of going from A to B is never easy. And like the most prominent example of like what you've said there was when I felt there was a big event going on in Bristol, where I now live, and it was networking young entrepreneurs with Anne Hyatt, who is a very prominent woman in business. She worked as literally the second arm for Google, like Eric Schmidt, and she worked at Amazon with Jeff Bezos and Silicon Valley. Like, she's a woman to know.
Yeah.
And I remember it being about 400 quid for a ticket, and I was like, oh God, I am not my mother's daughter if I pay that much for a ticket. So I sent this essay, and she not only let me go, I think it was her assistant who passed me over to her directly. She invited me for breakfast, and we chatted, and we've been friends ever since. She still helps me to this day. And it was one of those moments where, like, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I'm so glad that I asked, because sometimes I think we're all privy to having a lot of like withdrawal, and also having a lot of pride and thinking, well, I don't want to ask for something. But if you genuinely are in need, and I wouldn't have been able to afford that connection otherwise, I wouldn't have the relationship with Anne that I have now, whereby she helps me with sometimes the biggest questions that I have in business, because she's got those years in industry to help. So I think there's a real thing there of other people supporting others get their leg up, but it's not always that simple with these industries, as you probably well know.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point as well. Most people, young entrepreneurs, I've spoken to so many over the past few years, and I myself have only just sort of gotten into the real business world. Like I thought I was a businessman. I just had the podcast and an Instagram page, and I started the manifestation journal, and I sort of got hit hard because I was like, wow, okay, it's completely different to sort of what I was used to when I actually become a real entrepreneur, like an actual, not just for the namesake, like I was an actual entrepreneur, and I was sort of actually doing real things like you are now. And what I didn't realize is how much you don't have to, but it really does help if you bend the rules. And like you said there, like you're doing things outside of the box that most people wouldn't do or wouldn't even think of doing or expect you to have to do in order to get those situations. I think that's so important, isn't it? Sort of thinking outside the box and doing different things.
Yeah, and you probably found that too, in that you do have to think creatively and ask people for stuff that sometimes seems a bit cheeky, but otherwise these people don't know you exist, and they're not going to find out about you, because again, you haven't got an aunt, an uncle, a dad, a mum who works in that industry who can say, oh, I know someone who's doing that, or let me introduce you to that person. You've got to like go and knock on their door, swallow your pride, and be like, please don't ignore me, because obviously with your platform, and you know, with mine too, I think we have something really important to share, which is stories, and that, you know, people need to be given a chance and given a seat at the table, and oftentimes we have to just like make that happen ourselves. I hope it won't be like that forever, but at the moment I thoroughly expect the hustle of everybody who makes that happen for themselves.
Yeah, no, same. Well, let's get into then. How did you become, like, you can obviously see your passion, you just ooze like passion for books. So how did you actually get into becoming an actual entrepreneur yourself then? You went from sort of having the passion for books, enjoying it, and then bang, how did that happen? Like you said, you won the competition. Was that like the very first stage of this business being born, or was there something before? How did it sort of all happen for you?
So I think it all stemmed from trying to take as many opportunities when I was at university as I could. I think it was never lost on me, and all of my friends at university were mainly working class students as well, and they were going through the same as me, couldn't really afford literally to go out every single night and do the traditional, so you had to also think about not being able to afford to waste the time, which isn't to say that social life is a waste of time, but I certainly didn't have as much of one as I would have liked. But there was a common strand of people who were like, we need to kind of get every single experience that we can out of these 3 years, because those are very short years once you get started. And so I think the first kind of experiences that I took out of university was I got a funding scholarship to go and study in Berlin. And that was one of the places where I was really introduced to these amazing female writers, and wanted to make sure that just because I had the accessibility to go to Berlin and had that scholarship to go to university, that those female writers wouldn't be something that was kind of off of the mainstream for women like myself who would enjoy reading them and hearing their stories, but they just weren't that prominent. They were always curriculum books. So that was like the first thing that I felt really opened my eyes. If I didn't have that experience, which I was extremely fortunate to be given, then I don't think I would have gone on to do other things. And I think university gave me the confidence to basically ask for shit that I did. Sorry, such a very personally thing. Just ask for shit that I wouldn't usually get. So I applied for a summer internship at Cosmo. I still had to work, but I moved my work to London. I worked at a soap shop at the time. It won't take many people to guess which one it was, but I was able to move so I could earn money whilst I was doing my internship and afford to do it. And it was kind of, I got burnt out, but it was so worth it. And at Cosmo, I was working with amazing women who were managing accounts like Birchbox and Glossybox. And so that was my first understanding of the subscription world and how I could possibly like blend those two things together, because my time in like Berlin studying these female writers and my time at Cosmo studying subscription boxes was kind of like blurred together. And so I kind of came back to university with this knowledge of those two things. I very quickly got shut down from being able to do a master's and a PhD, which was my first like aspiration for once I left. It was just way too expensive and I couldn't feel like I could make it work. I think mentally at that point, having juggled jobs and tutoring and this internship, I was starting to feel really mentally drained. And I think I realized that it probably wasn't sustainable to put that on myself, to be like, oh, I could work these jobs and keep doing a master's, because I just felt like a bit of a shell of myself at that point. And the only things that kept inspiring me was this idea of kind of bringing women's literature to people through some sort of way. And that's when I started to think about Books That Matter as a community. I started the Instagram, and it kind of just occurred to me, a little bit like you perhaps, that it needed to be a product-led thing as well as a community. And then this email popped into my inbox for business students at the University of Sussex to apply for Startup Sussex. And I just thought I'd apply anyway, because I was English. I didn't know anything about business. Still don't really, but I've got 4 years in doing it now. But yeah, I became the first female winner of that prize. And they really loved Books That Matter. And it was just the most amazing thing to be able to get what was, you know, and still is a really good amount of money, a really generous amount of money to be able to start up this business. And without that, I literally would have been able to. So yeah, that was the whole journey. Sorry, I feel like I've been talking for ages.
On that point, do you think like you said, it's just like a random email come through and it was like the thing that you actually needed without realizing? Do you believe in, what's the right way to word it, like things, what will be like things like destiny, stuff like that? So serendipitous moments, I think that's the right way to say it.
I think people are very very quick to dismiss things like manifestation and law of attraction. I can't say I know that much about either, but I really respect people who do and people who pursue that, because I literally think if you open your eyes to opportunities, then essentially that is kind of manifestation. You are making things happen for yourself. And if your eyes are open enough and you're receptive to different things, even if they seem scary, then you are attracting new energies and new opportunities. And I think even if that does sound airy fairy or whatever, like, I don't care. It's just, it's one of those, if you are open, then I think opportunities come to you. If you think I can't do that, or that's not for me, then you start closing your vision off to other things that could happen for you. But I do think also that things are fated. It seemed like such immaculate timing that all these things came together, because I just remember like holding myself in despair in the library, where I always do that apparently at uni. And I was thinking, oh, I have no idea what I'm going to do with my life, and like I wasn't going to be able to be an academic. And then that kind of happened, and it fell into place with a lot of hard work. But that email definitely felt like a bit of a beacon of hope at that moment, where I did think, I have no idea why or what I'm going to do with these 3 years of my life that I've spent studying. And I do feel like that was an opportunity to channel them into something really meaningful.
Well, our two worlds have just collided. Your world of books and my world of, I'm a big believer in manifestation, stuff like that. This is my product, if you didn't know. I don't know if you can see that. The Manifestation Journal. Our worlds have just collided. So I'm a big believer in manifestation. So I thought I'd quickly, shamelessly and selfishly,
of course,
my product as well. But talking about products is a good little segue. Tell us a bit more about your products, plural, the business, and yeah, what are you doing with it currently? What stage is it at? And yeah, just tell us a bit more about before we go into what happened last week.
Yeah, so Books That Matter is a monthly subscription box, and we put together curated, themed boxes and reading experiences that center on women's writing. What I'm super passionate about is making sure that people have opportunities and platforms. And for me, that looks like creating that space for women's writing, specifically women of marginalized backgrounds. We have so many stats that we throw around at Books That Matter, but one of my favorite is that you are more likely to get your book published if your name is David than if you're a woman or a person of minority background.
Wow.
And there are currently less writers of kind of like female identifying writers right now than there were in the 19th century. The book world has continued to focus more on marketing and publishing books by predominantly straight white males. There's nothing to say that there's something wrong with that. Many of them are great books that go on to win amazing prizes, but without the marketing budget, the right publisher, the right agents, the access, women's writing just doesn't do as well. And that's nothing to say. Some of our comments are in the lieu of like saying, oh, maybe they're not as good, maybe their writing's not as good. Their writing is amazing. But we live in a world that has unfortunately not offered women those opportunities until very recently. And that's basically what Books That Matter is all about, creating a space to celebrate those stories, to project these books out into the world, give them a wider readership. And we've seen that through people subscribing to our boxes and supporting female authors, they're not only feeling more empowered themselves because they're seeing themselves and their stories represented in literature, and they're escaping, as we all had to do in the pandemic, but they're also feeling inspired by being introduced to new cultures, new backgrounds. But we're also putting women on the charts, like the book charts. That was something that happened that was amazing, like a couple of years ago. So start of the pandemic, one of our authors of the month was named in the bookseller and said that, you know, their sales had soared and they were in the charts. And stuff like that happens more regularly for us now when we partner with people like Sally Rooney on pre-releases. In the coming, I don't know when this is going out, so I don't know what I can talk about.
This will be out next Monday. So
okay. So our April book is actually the first kind of pre-release of a Korean translated fiction by a really coveted author. And so it's just so amazing to work with people like that and give them a UK-based platform, celebrate their releases, their debuts. And it's just so rewarding. And yeah, inside each box, probably should have done that much more. I'm I'm such a book person at heart that I can't do things concisely, but our book subscriptions start at £15 a month, and inside you can also get gifts which are practical, purposeful, and centered around providing a great reading experience that are also from female-led brands and creative. So think teas, snacks, stationery, things that are really purposeful, great quality, what am I trying to say? Kind of ecologically friendly, but yeah, it's all about supporting women, which obviously was something that struck a conversation post Dragon's Den. But we've got between 3,500 and 4,000 subscribers a month. That's before Dragon's Den.
Wow.
Things have gone crazy, but it's just been wonderful to be able to completely disrupt the publishing industry and show people that there's such a demand for a space like this that focuses on women's writing and marginalized voices. Because I think we're growing up in a generation that is just so much more empathetic and so much more progressive. So yeah, that's Books That Matter in a nutshell. And that's a very big nutshell. Sorry.
Huge. I wanted to leave the Dragon's Den until just now because I wanted to make it really clear that, like you just said there, like you actually saw a lot of success before the show, and I think that's credit to obviously yourself, your passion, and the idea you've actually created there. So firstly, well done on that. And secondly, let's go into it then. Dragon's Den, how did that come about? What happened during it? And yeah, let's just dive straight into it.
Yeah, so before Dragon's Den, I'm so glad that you mentioned that as well, because I think it's very easy now for like a lot of the new audience that has come to us to think that kind of like there was kind of pre-Dragon's Den Books That Matter and then post-Den, because it does have such a large impact being on TV for such a long period of time. But before the Den, we actually quadrupled in size during the pandemic. There were so many people who wanted to have these monthly reading experiences sent to their door, be part of a virtual book club when we couldn't see each other face to face. And there were so many authors as well that really needed support in a virtual and kind of delivered to your door kind of way when they weren't able to put their books out there in the pandemic, because obviously there was so much going on in the world, but for authors, and particularly female authors, when they don't get that massive marketing budget, they're not put up for these women's these writing prizes, they were just having their events pushed back, their launches pushed back, their publishing dates pushed back of works of fiction that they worked so hard on. So we worked with so many authors, and as well as the Women's Prize for Fiction in the pandemic, to put those voices front and center, and that was hugely rewarding. And it was a really formative time for us, even when me and my team were completely separate. I was shielding and we just didn't meet up for a year and a half, but it was such an amazing time. And then in the middle of that, we were contacted a few times by Dragon Apply, and it felt really weird. And I guess from you and your point of like manifestation, that probably does feel right, because I would prop my phone up next to my screen every day and watch really old Dragon's Den episodes back to back. It was my escape during shielding and during lockdown. I just couldn't get enough of it. It was such a strange addiction. And then it was just weird. One day they were in my inbox, and I would never have applied, because I just don't think that that's very me. Like I didn't ever think I'd have the gall to go on there. And at first I think I said, thank you, like we'll think about it. And then they came back again and asked. And it did just feel really meant to be. And I was like, I think that after this really challenging period of not knowing whether the business was going to survive, I didn't physically pack boxes anymore, thank goodness, but I was like not able to leave my house because I have a chronic lung condition. I was like, the business has just defied the odds. And I think if we can do this year, and we could do lockdown, and we could do the pandemic, then we could do this. And so I said yes. And then it was a kind of a whirlwind of a year getting to the point where we were going to film. And the week before Dragon's Den, one of our key team members left. We dispatched her with love. She was off for a new opportunity, and that was a challenge in itself. It challenged me in all sorts of ways. And once I was in the den, and I felt fiercely protective over Books That Matter, and once I walked away, turning away their deal, it just I felt like I can do anything. If I can survive 2 hours in Dragon's Den, then I can actually do anything. And so we changed the branding of the business. We leveled up so many things, the website, the community, and it just was such a force for good. It was the biggest challenge that anybody possibly could ever have for their business. Somebody constantly asking you questions about why you chose to do this, why you do that, and why. I mean, the maths was just beyond me, but it was just the biggest challenge ever. But I'm so grateful that it happened, because it's led to so many amazing things. And not least of all, just like this really amazing pivot for the business, which it's just been an amazing time.
I think sometimes you need that, then, like you said, you need sort of either someone to say well done and sort of point out that what you have been doing has been worth it, or someone to give you a leg up and sort of help you get to that next stage. Or like I think it was Peter Jones that said like well done, and you can see it in his face, like he looked so almost proud of you. And that, like I'm glad you said that about watching Dragon's Den, because I've been doing that as well. And I've picked up certain things, like when they see a young entrepreneur in the den, they really do sort of light up, and you can see the look on their face, like they're really proud of that young entrepreneur. And I think Peter especially, and I think it was Stephen as well, those two in particular, I think they look really proud of you. Did you pick up on that? And like you said, you was in there for 2 hours. Did you sort of pick up on that affection?
Yeah, it was it was a really great time, and I'm like struggling not to get emotional about it now, because I think the people that you fear the most sometimes become your biggest allies. And that's not to say that in every walk of life, but I feared those men who you see on TV and you see them be really scathing. And to be honest, in the edit that they put out, maybe it looked differently, but I know that Stephen and Tuka and Peter were just my biggest allies there. And I have so much respect for Sarah and Deborah, but the men in Dragon's Den were just so lovely to me and could really get behind the ethos, why it was needed, and perhaps being on the flip side, being men looking at female entrepreneur and looking at a product that's for women, they could see from their own lived experience why this was needed and why this space that we've created is important. But I remember Tuka telling me that I reminded him of his daughter, and Peter was telling me all about his girls. He's a father, I think 3 or 4 girls he's got. And Stephen obviously backs so many female entrepreneurs, and they were really supportive. And I remember finishing off my pitch and being like, I couldn't believe that I'd survived the pitch alone. And Peter was the first person to be like, how do you think that went? Take a breather, take a minute, like you've done a really great job. And I don't think anybody goes into Dragon's Den expecting to be showered with praise, but there's so much of those 2 hours that I know that happened that were not featured on TV. I mean, there was so much praise featured on TV, but there are so many moments that I'll really cherish because these massive business moguls thought that I was doing a good job and really could get behind it. And like you said, I think they see the value in a young entrepreneur who's willing to push even further than what they've been able to achieve in maybe 1 or 2 years. So they were really lovely.
When Sarah, I think it was Sarah, she said she was out, and then like Deborah was sort of like criticizing it a little bit. She couldn't really get it. She thought it was sort of, she didn't get what you was trying to do with it. And then Sarah said she was out, and like the camera cuts to you, and I don't know whether that was like an actual thing or whether that was an edit, but like you looked like you literally winced, like you sort of went like, oh, when she said she was out. Like, what was you thinking when like the first couple sort of said it's not for me?
I think at the time, that it's going to happen. I don't think anybody goes into there thinking that there's going to be a 5-offer situation. But it stings. And I think that was the whole thing, that when I came out and spoke to Izzy, who at the time came with me, I was only allowed to bring one person, and we only found out the night before. So I thought I was going to be doing the whole thing alone, but she was sat in the dressing room. And when I told Izzy about how protective standing in the den makes you feel about something that you've brought to life, like I don't have children, so I can't compare it to that, but like I just felt fiercely protective of it. And so when someone criticizes it and disagrees and says no, they're not going to offer you this opportunity, it's incredibly damning, I guess, in a way. But you have to kind of pick yourself up. I remember I slightly wobbled, like my foot wobbled, and Deborah asked if I needed to sit down, and I was like, I just need a glass of water. And she was like, I'm sorry, I hope I haven't done that to you. And I was like, no, because you need to hear these things. There are things on TV that were said and framed, and obviously it's all very dramatic, but we had really productive conversations about how we frame our business, how we do things. And ultimately, like the Books That Matter are now not continuing Brave Girls Book Club for many, many, many reasons. One of which was a trademark dispute with another business, which every business seems to have come into contact with. But it was also a real time of reflection. So I still took on those comments and was like, I'm going to take these really productively, and hold myself accountable. I know why I run this business. I'm not going to back down on my ethos, but I will take this into consideration for when we go forward, because they do know what they're doing. They might not agree with the feminist ethos, but they still know what makes good business sense. And so I shan't be changing anything immediately, and our ethos is very important to us, but the lessons are there, and they're like in my head. They'll still be kind of part of the business going forward. The whole experience will. But they probably got it spot on with that wince, because I probably did. I was like, oh no, because I think they were the first 2 to say no, so I just thought, oh god, it's downhill from here. But it actually then picked up quite considerably. So I think at the time I did probably feel a bit bad, but it was great. And still fully respect them in their own rights.
Last couple on the Dragon's Den, then, before we move into something slightly different, to just to round off then. Like you said, you didn't really like you struggled with the numbers, you said initially, but you had to obviously go through that whole business plan process, stuff like that. Is that what sort of gave you the confidence to walk away from the offer, to like you after spending, I guess, probably weeks, months even working on the business plan? Is that what made you think, you know what, I've got a good understanding of the business now, I can actually walk away? And then couple with that cheeky question you don't have to answer, did you have a dragon in mind walking in?
Okay, firstly, I will say that it was literally about a full year of working on all of the due diligence and the business plan to be able to, and once you do all of that, it's very similar to when they say you're going to be, when they air your episode and they say, okay, you're going to be on next week, or you're going to be on in 4 weeks. We had completed like 9 months of due diligence and it still wasn't really guaranteed that you were going to get picked. So there was a lot of hope resting on that. I'm a perfectionist, so I was just trying to do the most. But I think that in putting together this Bible of the business, all the numbers, the dreams, the aspirations, everything we want to do and what we've achieved so far, it gives you a really good scope of what you are capable of and what could come from, you know, not just this opportunity, but any opportunity for investment, mentorship, or whatever. But personally, for me, we went into the den not just for the money. It was an opportunity that was offered to us, so I felt to accept would be a good opportunity to just see what happens, because it was kind of a no-win, you know, what's that thing? It's a win-win situation that I got an offer and I got a dragon, amazing. If I also got a great PR opportunity, then that is also amazing for the business. And as long as I could hold my own, then it would be good publicity. So I'm pretty proud looking back on that and thinking that I did. But I think, yeah, for us, it was more about the mentorship side of things and having somebody there who could kind of use their years in business to inform what we might need and where we might be going. So yeah, I think by the time I stood there and thought about the money versus the percentage of the business, I did think, actually, I think we can just do this by ourselves. And there's been so much that's happened since then in terms of planning for the business that I've really started to slow down. I think that the growth and the marketing is always fast paced because we always want to bring more customers on, nurture the ones that we've got. But I was always the kind of person who thought, I want to do this first before anyone else does it. Yeah. And I listened to a really good interview the other day with the person who runs Headspace, or it was Calm. Gosh, they're competitors. I shouldn't get that mixed up, but one of them. And they were saying that there's this true value to like slowing down, you know, taking a seedling of an idea and really nurturing it before you get something off the ground. And I think part of me realized in that moment that anything that was going to come beyond what is already a successful business could be nurtured and built over time. We didn't need this like quick injection of cash to make it happen. And since then, we've had people offer to be on the board, people who want to support and mentor. And that was what we were looking for. And it doesn't necessarily need to come from Dragon's Den. And what we have got is amazing support from the BBC and an incredible feature on television and a lifetime supply of content, which Izzy, who manages content, could not be happier about. But I think when we went into the den, I didn't say anything when I was there because I know that can really piss them off. And I can understand why if you go in and you'd be like, I only want Stephen Bartlett, like that's going to piss people off. I think I was really eager to see what Stephen would think. I think he was a real curveball for me because I really didn't know if he would be able to get behind something like this when a lot of his focus is on the digital. But I think obviously he saw a lot of value in our community. But in all honesty, I think I went in there really with an open mind, but I think possibly what I didn't expect was not receiving the kind of approval, or I don't know whether you could call it approval, but it definitely wasn't my expectation that the women in the den would be the people to challenge me the most. And I think that was what was one of the biggest challenges. I didn't actually have a person in mind who was like, they'll give me money and I want them to give me money. It was, I think these people are going to get it the most. And I think I saw the men being, oh, what about men about it, which actually was a big surprise for me. So I think that was the unexpected part.
Final thing on the Dragon's Den, and then we'll round off with a few quick fire questions. Are we allowed to say what happened like 10 minutes or so after airing? Because I've seen it, but yeah, like what happened after that? Because like you said, you had success before, and then the episode aired, and then within 10 minutes, it all just sort of went mental, didn't it?
Yeah. So we were all sat there. We decided on having a relatively modest watch party, just being responsible with COVID, but also I was just not in a frame of mind where I was able to host like a great number of people. We've done launch parties and we love hosting like authors and publicists, but I was like, I think when stuff like this happens and it's incredibly personal, because I was like, I'm not the kind of person who feels like I have a personal brand. But I think if you put yourself out there on the internet enough, people seem to make that deduction for you. So I was like, this is my face and it's me a year ago. So I have no idea what she's going to say and what's going to be cut. So I felt like I really needed to be surrounded by friends whilst we watched it. And so it was me and my team and a selection of our like housemates, friends, people we've worked with. And we all sat down and watched it on the projector together in the office. And yeah, we made £10,000 in 10 minutes.
Wow.
And the site crashed twice.
Wow.
And we'd even expanded the bandwidth, like the maximum bandwidth that we could possibly get, because I was trying to control it the whole week before. I was like, let's control every single aspect. Can't do that apparently. And I had drank so much on the run up to that my team decided not to tell me that the website had crashed. Wow. They decided to deal with it in-house because they were like, I was just going to freak out. But yeah, those 10 minutes that followed were really crazy. And to be honest, it hasn't stopped since. And it's been wonderful to have people coming to the socials, asking questions, buying, purchasing stuff with friends, and just supporting us in every way possible. And I think actually what was really great was showing the kind of diverse opinions between Sarah and Deborah and myself, and really being able to start a conversation with the community as well, because I think that sparked something with people in terms of, you know, showing them what the reality is for women getting published and getting themselves seen and heard in business and in the book world, and, you know, making them want to read more women or support more women in business. And so it's nearly a week now since we were on it, and it's just not stopped, and it's been amazing.
No, well done. That is honestly genuinely amazing, and I feel almost proud of you. I've and I feel proud, like, just to sort of, because I've researched you and I've seen where you've come from and what you're doing now. So well done on that. Final few just quick fire questions, if you don't mind, just before we wrap up. I really appreciate your time. What would be your one piece of advice for the young people out there, whether they're involved in business or just from a sort of self-development side of things? What would be your one piece of advice for those people?
I firmly believe in following something that makes you feel passionate and makes you want to, it's so cliche, but get out of bed. And sometimes that can be really hard. And especially if this podcast obviously goes out and influences a lot of people, but I imagine that they're young entrepreneurs and people who are with aspirations. And we've just lived through a pandemic, and however you feel about your progress right now, you've still got your whole life ahead of you to make crazy decisions and to back yourself. So I think the main thing that I've always tried to hold on to is just backing yourself 100%, and not comparing yourself to anybody else, because you don't know what their assets and their setup looks like behind the scenes. A lot of people, more than you expect, have a leg up into industries that you want to be in. So the best thing you can do is kind of tunnel vision yourself on what you want to do. You don't have to rush to get there. It doesn't matter if you're 20, 25, 30. There's no cap on like what you can do at a certain age. And I think I'm learning that now, that you don't have to burn yourself out to be chasing people with a lot more money and a lot more resources than you do, because as long as you go after what you want, you can show people your value. Ask for mentorship, ask for people to support you. That's my like secondary thing, is don't ask, don't get. Just keep asking people, and don't get too precious about when people say no. Just keep finding people who will say yes, because there'll be so many people who will. I myself have been dedicating more time to finding smaller, like fledgling businesses, trying to connect them with people who will help them, even if it's not me. Like, I can't consider myself a business coach in any way, but just creating that environment where we can support authors and young entrepreneurs. And I think that there are so many places out there that now people are willing to connect and share their knowledge and share their expertise. So I think just believe in yourself and believe that other people will believe in you as well.
I love that. And final thing, well, almost final thing, almost final thing, one more after this. obviously this podcast is called If Only They Knew. What is one thing you wish you knew at an earlier stage, whether it be in like the business world or just in life in general?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me in the business world is that you can't do everything. I think there's that really cheesy quote. I love a cheesy quote, but like, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. At the start of the business, I was quite bad at asking for help, specifically with delegating. I tried to cap myself so many times at like, I was at my limits of packing the boxes, doing the marketing, doing the socials, doing the emails. And I had the funds and facilities to bring somebody else on. It wasn't my own pride that led me to do that. I just believed that it was the entrepreneurial way. It was the working class way of doing everything yourself. And that was just not a sustainable thing to do. I burnt out so many times. So I think knowing that there's a point at which you need to ask more people to help, or maybe you need to hire somebody, even if that's part-time or a freelancer. Being a good entrepreneur doesn't mean that you have to do everything yourself, because you inevitably can't run a good business if you're running yourself into the ground. And I think secondly to that, from like me personally, I've always felt that maybe safe doesn't always mean good. I like played it safe a lot of the time. I was really scared of taking risks in and outside of the business for me as a person and as an entrepreneur, especially like alongside Dragon's Den, and not believing that I was the person who could go and do that. I think that sometimes we need to step out of our safe zones, which are often very different to our comfort zones. I think our safe zones are places where we've been taught to stay, whether that's telling yourself, I'm not somebody who does public speaking, I'm not somebody who asks for a raise at my job, I'm not the kind of person who does this, or even when you think around relationships or friendships, like I can't leave something because I think it's making me uncomfortable, or this is a toxic friendship or a toxic relationship. I think sometimes things that feel safe are not always good for us. And so unless it's something wildly different and very, very ill-advised, I would say if one tiny part of you is saying like, start this business, start writing a book, maybe don't talk to that person if they make you feel like shit. Just listen to it, because keeping something in your life because it feels familiar doesn't always pan out in making you feel good about yourself, and kind of, it's not got longevity behind it. So I think there are lots of people pleasers, and a lot more people pleasers than we think there are in the world. And I think we do need to be a bit more selfish sometimes, and we've not been taught to do that.
No, definitely. I agree with that 100%. My final question then, what is next for yourself and the brand? And tied in with that, what do you want your legacy to be, if you want a legacy at all?
Oh, that's so lovely. I think for us next, there's so much going on. I wouldn't even know where to start. I personally have always wanted to make time for my writing. I've been pretty bad at that since We Knew and Dragon's Den was airing. But I want to make more time for my own personal goals in writing fiction and doing things like that, and kind of putting my time into volunteering as well. I've always, like when I was younger, we used to do a lot of like charitable stuff within my family, and we give a lot financially as a business, but I also want to be putting time into local businesses here in Bristol, and like there's a lot of great charities who support like female sex workers and like marginalized women, and I think as a brand we're also kind of echoing that with our approach of our collaborations too. We've got some really exciting launches coming up, which I don't have any leeway to talk about, but we're basically trying to disrupt the reading world and the publishing world as much as we can, and making it accessible and exciting for people who are perhaps kind of struggling with finding the right books and finding the right time to read. So that's something we're super, super fired up about. And I guess the legacy for me is always going to be giving marginalized people, women, a voice and giving them a platform. So to create a space that kind of, what do we say, not predates, but kind of transcends beyond my life and the work that I've put into the business. And there's this continual space that, be it Books That Matter or something else by that time, that kind of performs a platform for women and gives them a space and encourages people to read. that's all I want, because I think that for me, accessibility and empowerment and a celebration of women's voices is what's like at the core of what I'm trying to do here.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been really interesting hearing more about your story and your advice as well. And like I said, I almost feel proud of you. Like, and I've so that's obviously saying something about the way you come across as well. So thank you. The floor is now yours. If you've got a final message, or you just want to tell people where to find out more about you, yeah, please let them know now.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me. I've had like the best time. It's been a hot minute since I've done a podcast, so I'm so excited. If people wanted to go and check out the subscriptions and the offers that we have, they can go to booksthatmatter.co.uk. And our most active social channels, I would say, are Instagram, where we're Books That Matter UK, and TikTok, where it's just Books That Matter.
Brilliant. Well, like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you so much. Speak soon.